Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news, with questions continuing on Max Verstappen's future with Red Bull. It's not the news that he would have wanted from the team, confirming the RB21 will not get any major upgrade from now until the end of the season. There will be tweaks still to this year's Red Bull Challenger, but already 49 points behind Oscar Piastri in the championship, and potentially that could get even worse given the flexi-wing changes haven't really seemed to have done all that much. The next couple of Grand Prix will be critical. Maybe Spain was an outlier and actually the flexi-wing changes are more substantial than they initially appear, but this is not good news for Max, especially when after Spain he effectively said, doesn't really matter that I crashed into George, this championship is done and dusted anyway. Very much enjoy to your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Let's get right into things. Firstly, really with Aston Martin, Adrian Newey locked himself away in a cupboard for the last couple of months to design things, but he did turn up in Monaco, of course, for that weekend's race, kind of his first time with the team, gets to see a bit of the operational stuff. There's lots to talk about this because they've got an unbelievable factory, right? There near the Silverstone camp, you've got Adrian Newey, you have Fernando Alonso, you've got all the technical resources, you've got Honda, you've got Andy Cowell, top Mercedes man when they were dominating the power unit side. Every piece of the puzzle is theoretically there, but Newey was actually pretty public in his frustration with one particular issue, and it seems that, Aston Martin are happy for this, right? They don't want Newey to come in and say, oh, well done, Lawrence, you're doing such a great job, look at all this money. Lawrence wants to put money in, but actually get some results. So if Newey's going to say, okay, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, that's what they're going to want to change. That's the point of him being the managing technical partner, as it were. So this is Newey's plan, and he did have a frustration. If you guys weren't aware of this, Newey made it clear the other day that he doesn't think their simulation tools are anywhere near where they need to be. Their wind tunnel, great, spectacular, state of the art. But the simulation tools, effectively the software that converts what happens in the wind tunnel, because you're not using real size cars in the wind tunnel, things are scaled down, which maybe isn't the biggest deal. But the point is that in the wind tunnel, you've got data. You've got to translate that data to what happens on track. The wind tunnel can be amazing, can get you the best data, but if you're not using that data right, it's not going to really help you, right? So that's the key limitation that Newey said, is that the software of the simulation just isn't really up to speed. And with these ground effect cars, it's very, very complicated indeed. But Newey said it's effectively a 2-year project to get that resolved. So effectively, Aston Martin, if they are going to deliver a car next year that is going to be really strong, it's going to be a lot of Newey magic, I think, more so than it is, looking at the data and analysing what it's going to be. It's going to be more conceptual, maybe, because that's when Newey thinks there's a limitation. But Fernando Alonso says all simulators will have some kind of correlation issues to the real car, kind of saying that, it's not perfect, but nobody's going to be perfect, which I suppose is kind of true. Newey highlighted it as a key issue, like he wasn't very happy with it, but then maybe that's like kind of Newey's way of suggesting, this is a problem. Maybe others in other teams, in other positions, would have been more generous to the simulation tools. Maybe it's not that bad. Alonso saying that, Red Bull, for example, they suffer a lot. They've talked about it very repeatedly over the last 12 months or so, really, that their correlation is not really working with reality. How many races have they won over that period? Still plenty, right? Okay, and then they won last year's drivers with a car that seemingly wasn't fully correlating. So it's not to say that it's impossible to make it work. It's just some weekends it might throw you off, and obviously if it's really bad, then it's going to throw off your whole setup, especially going into a brand new set of regulations. There has been talk about Newey as well, just because Ferrari currently struggling. Questions on why Newey never went to Ferrari, because for some time we thought this was a very realistic and likely possibility indeed, but Aston Martin got him instead. The general theory was that Fred Vasseur and Ferrari weren't really willing to give up as much power and control over the team as Newey wanted. Newey's also a shareholder in the team, right, in Aston Martin. So it would have been difficult for Ferrari to put together a compelling, as compelling a case to Newey as Aston Martin did. But they are still Ferrari, right? So that was the big question, and maybe they could have tried harder to kind of require, basically acquire his services, because maybe they require them based on current evidence. We know that ever since Newey's left Red Bull, it's not been looking so pretty over there. Correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation on that one, but, the point still stands. So George Russell talks about the driver market. It's pretty funny what Russell says here, because obviously he's confident that he's going to maintain the Mercedes seat, but he does say that Verstappen would be the number one choice for all teams if he was to be available. And even, they would do it at Ferrari if they could. I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen. And even then, I just wonder what Max thinks, right? Like going into next year, is he more likely just to stick with Red Bull, see how it goes? Probably as it stands. Mercedes might be ideally the team to go for, but it's certainly not clear there's going to be an option there. Aston Martin's an option too with Honda. Ferrari are Ferrari, but, look, they've put a lot into... Okay, Hamilton's not performing great right now, but there's more to Hamilton getting signs than just performing well on the track, right? There's other pieces to it as well. Trying to bring the team up to the level that they want to perform at, and these other elements that Hamilton brings from Mercedes by winning all those championships over all those years. But certainly right now, there is a lot for Ferrari to do and to think about, and David Coulthard again says, why are Ferrari so bad? Effectively, when you've got all that potential, all of that global support. Speaking of the driver market, Red Bull have an unconfirmed seat next year next to Max. Mercedes have an unconfirmed seat next to Antonelli, technically. Both of the V-carb seats are unknown. Alpine, we don't know what's happening next to Gasly. I think Cadillac, of course, coming onto the grid for the first time. So, there's been some discussion about what they might do. I think it's maybe not going to be as chaotic as it was this season, but I will say it may depend to some degree on what happens with Hadjar and Lawson if Max Verstappen was to get a race ban. We talked about this yesterday, that according to reports, there is roughly an equal chance of either of these guys getting the drive. I said yesterday that I thought they would just give Hadjar the drive, and I still kind of think that they will, because the argument is you've seen Lawson in that car before. Hadjar, you've not seen him in a very difficult to handle Red Bull, so let's see how he goes, even over just one race weekend. The other argument is it might help Red Bull's case to put Lawson in again, because then they can get a bit more information. Not necessarily out of Lawson, because I think that honestly Red Bull have kind of made their mind up about him. I don't think he's ever getting that drive back again, unfortunately, but it's not like the way that things are currently going, he would deserve it. But the point is that he had a couple of races in that car. He had some testing, although the testing was a little bit, let's say disrupted in some regards. They had the couple of races that he did race in, none of them went to plan, but at least if they put him back in, they could say, okay, what does the car feel like now compared to what it felt like before? How's Lawson performing now compared to how he performed before? So it might give you a bit more insight as to the way the car has changed since the start of the season, the upgrades they've brought, but also whether the changes they have made it easier for a second driver if Lawson was to do better on that one-off weekend than happened at the start of the year. But at the end of the day, this whole discussion revolves around Max getting a race ban, which is not exactly, it's far from guaranteed. It's not overwhelmingly unlikely, I would say, but it's certainly something to keep in mind, because the next couple of races, Max is going to be on high alert, as of course will be Red Bull themselves. Speaking of the drivers though, these supposedly are the 4 drivers they're looking at. Perez is likely to sign, Bottas as well, Zhou and Drugovich. Now, I don't mean Bottas in the sense as well as Perez, because I don't imagine they'll sign more than one of those two. The kind of, let's say, interest on Colton Herta has cooled to some degree, and it's pretty likely they might go for a driver from the Americas rather than necessarily a driver from the United States of America, as they might do. So Drugovich in the combo. Again, Drugovich will be hoping, won't he, really, that Stroll decides to take a week off and doesn't race in Canada. Of course, he really will want to compete at his home race, and Drugovich is going to do Le Mans. But if Drugovich steps into the Aston Martin, does a good job, that's a great audition for Cadillac. I don't think Drugo is ever getting the Aston Martin seat. It'll be Alonso, it'll be Max, it'll be George, I don't know. It'll be someone, probably not Drugovich. But maybe, I don't know, maybe there's an option there at some point. But for now, Drugovich would be auditioning for this seat, especially if they're interested, as it seems that they are. Alpine are a pretty interesting team at the moment as well. One interesting development is, so Briatore is kind of the de facto team principal right now, although technically he can't be because of the way that his role is structured in the team. Technically, he can't be the team principal, but we know that Oliver Oakes left after Miami in very controversial circumstances alongside the Doohan firing, of course, and there's been discussions, well, who actually is then the team principal at Alpine? People effectively are calling it Briatore, but I think technically it was some other guy. But they are making changes, and Stephen Nielsen. Now, Nielsen has been in the news over the last few months. That's because he was part of the FIA before then various drama got him out of there, right? So he departed his position as the FIA sporting director. He was there for 11 months, and, I don't think they really go into it in the article here, but there were various, let's say, disagreements with Ben Sulayem and the situation at the FIA. But, Nielsen's a bit of a journeyman in the sense that he's been under several teams and actually worked at Benetton with Briatore back in the day. So the idea of him coming back into that team in some form would be pretty interesting, to say the least. Briatore also, because this is what he does, made a few interesting comments on the cost cap right now. So if you guys aren't aware of how this really works, the top 3 earning employees, don't know if that includes the drivers or not, but effectively the drivers aren't included anyway. And the cost cap doesn't include those salaries. So if you pay Max Verstappen $65 million, that doesn't count towards your $135 million cost cap. So, it's a bit cheesy in a way, because what it means for certainly the engineers of the team, like if you've got 1,000 engineers, unfortunately, you can pay Hamilton $100 million, pay him whatever he wants, doesn't count for the cost cap. But for the people that do count, you've got to be very careful, right? So this is what Briatore says, that excluding top earners undermines the extent of the cap, or the cap's intent, let's say. Briatore emphasised the cost cap budget was a good idea. I believe we should increase the budget, including the salaries of the driver. Because, I think the cost cap has proven to be a good decision, but there's no doubt that the top teams are getting around it in some way. There's various tax things you can use and clever accounting to probably spend more than you should. And the FIA themselves are like, yeah, teams are doing this, but we can't really stop them. So, whatever, right? We'll keep the cap at 135 mil. But the argument is that the teams that have serious money, they're welcome to pay their top staff, Adrian Newey, for example, at Aston Martin, and of course their drivers, hundreds of millions of dollars, and they would still spend just as much as they would pre-cost cap. It's just they spend it in different ways now to acquire the real top talent, and then unfortunately a lot of the engineers are pretty limited in what they can get paid, because if you want another engineer, then, that counts towards the cap, right? Okay, there are some exemptions that maybe can happen there, but Briatore making an interesting perspective. The big question, though, for me from today is, what's the future of the Drivers' Championship? After Spain, are we officially now in an environment where it is a 2-horse race for the World Championship? These are the current driver standings. Yes, Hadjar's done a phenomenal job. He's currently 9th in the standings, but at the top, it's Piastri and it's Lando Norris, separated by 10 points. Piastri has been on the podium, I think, every race this season. So the first, well, apart from the first race, obviously, in Melbourne, since then he's been on the podium every single time. He's also finished a boatload of Grand Prix in a row, which is very impressive. Look, Piastri's consistency, if he does win the championship, that's going to be what does it. If you look at his qualifying results, he's not always on pole, but if he's not on pole, he's 2nd, 3rd or 4th 99% of the time in recent rounds. I think even since the end of last year, that was still true as well. So Piastri's consistency has really improved, and I think he knows that by being fast, but more than that, by being consistent, that could well be enough to beat Lando over the course of a season. But if you look at the championship standings right now, given the fact that Verstappen won last year's championship by a pretty similar margin to this, to be fair, to roughly Norris, he held onto that gap pretty nicely, although Norris did close it up a little bit towards the end of last season before it then fell away again after what we saw in Brazil. But look, Max is at 137, right? That's 49 points behind where Oscar Piastri is. Look, that would be the biggest championship comeback, and it's a very tall order as it stands. Now, it's not impossible in the sense that both McLarens are expected to, and likely will continue to expect, to battle with each other. I think it was, a talking point, let's say, in Imola, and even at other Grand Prix, we've kind of expected the McLarens to battle. They haven't really, and there's been a feeling that, for example, Piastri was defending hard from Russell the first lap of Imola, and maybe wasn't really considering the fact that, defending from Verstappen is also very much a key threat. But I think McLaren have felt for some time now that really the championship is one of their guys to lose. And Max is now falling further behind. The flexi-wing changes in Spain didn't really seem to do much. I think there will be tracks where Max can definitely still win, but it's just the gap to Oscar and Oscar's consistency and Lando's, still very solid outright pace and some decent tracks for him to come as well. Then it just puts him in a position where Verstappen's comeback in the championship seems rather unlikely, especially when he said it after Spain that the championship's over, the car isn't fast enough, and obviously he made the error, let's say misjudgment at the end of the race with George Russell. Now, to add insult to injury here, the car is probably not going to get much better. This last weekend out there in Spain was the hope of many teams that, okay, the new front wings, they're going to change the competitive picture. That's going to allow us to get back towards McLaren. Did it really? I mean, I don't know. Max was honestly a pretty good pace on the three-stop strategy for some time. And I do think that in upcoming rounds, we could still see the RB21 really show some pace in the hands of Verstappen. I'm not sure it's totally clear-cut quite yet, but the gap is substantial in the championship. McLaren, we're expecting they're going to bring something to their car at some point because they haven't really done much. Mercedes have more upgrades on the way. Ferrari have more upgrades on the way as well. But Red Bull seemingly don't really. Now, this is not a surprise. You've got next year to think about as well. But Marco says that currently only minor tweaks to the car are planned as they're now fully shifting focus. So effectively, they gave it a good go at the start of the season. They wanted to be within 25 points of Piastri going into Spain. They were within 25 points of Piastri going into Spain, but now they're 49 points behind after Spain. So that's the main issue, right? That they put themselves in a pretty good position after the start of the season, and then it all fell away in rather dramatic fashion, which is going to be difficult to catch up. Like, not impossible. Max wins a couple of races, and, Piastri and Lando tangle or whatever, drop out of the points. Absolutely possible, but just difficult to do that once, okay, but to do it twice and overturn 49 points, very difficult to foresee. So I think for Max, especially after his comments in Spain, he will definitely be feeling that probably, this championship is done. And that raises big questions, really, for what Red Bull do. Certainly what Max does with regard to Red Bull Racing. Does he stay? Does he go? Does he talk to other teams? Is he happy with the Red Bull environment? Like, if he recognises that, okay, maybe more race wins are going to come this year, but it's not going to be the championship, does he feel some way about potentially leaving, going somewhere else? Is that an option too? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. This is just the quick stat here from Oscar. 37 Grand Prix in a row that he's completed every single racing lap. So very impressive stuff. I mean, we're talking Mexico 2023, the whole of 2024, the whole of 2025 so far. Piastri's completed everything under the season, which I think does go to show a lot of the consistency, but also goes to show the level of reliability that Piastri has had, that the sport has had. And interesting, of course, that those Mercedes engines in Antonelli's car and Alonso's car for the last couple of rounds haven't had the greatest time. For McLaren, they seem to be better on top of that integration maybe than even, some of the other teams, even the Works team to some degree. But, I know there was some talk about why McLaren seemingly are in a good spot right now with their consistency and their reliability. But I know that it's a gambler's fallacy to say, well, 37 in a row has got to end at some point. Well, it does have to end at some point. And, you might look at the numbers and say, well, there's a decent chance that Piastri has some sort of an issue this season which cost him certain points. Absolutely possible. Often those things can be championship deciding, but just because there's 37 Grand Prix in a row without a single DNF doesn't necessarily make it more likely that the next one will be, unless you want to include the fact that an old power unit is more likely to explode. But very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.